Exchange. I'm Brandy Noneke. I serve as Research and Development Manager for Citrus at UC Berkeley. And I also want to welcome our web viewers. Thank you for tuning in today. I want to make a special note. With your lunch, everything is compostable, so please compost it in the green bins in the back of the room. There are a couple events coming up that I'd like to raise to you, and hopefully you'll be able to make those. The Berkeley Innovators Series will feature Tony Zhu from DoorDash, and this will be December 1st at 5 p.m. here in the Banatow Auditorium. There will be a Citrus Tech for Social Good info session on Thursday, December 1st from 6:15 to 7:15 p.m., and that will be held downstairs in room 250. Also coming up is the Citrus Town Hall meeting and a holiday celebration on December 15th. And this will happen at 2 p.m. And this is a two-part event. So it'll happen on Thursday, December 15th, here in Sutarchadai Hall. At 2 p.m. that day, Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost Carol T. Christ will join us and speak on the future of research on the UC Berkeley campus as it relates to Citrus and the Banatow Institute initiatives. And then at 3 p.m. that day, we're going to have our holiday celebration from 3 to 4 p.m. in the atrium just outside of the auditorium. And so I'd like to introduce today's Citrus Research Exchange speaker, Susan Walters. So Susan is Senior Vice President at the California Emerging Technology Fund, which has the mission of closing the digital divide in California. Susan joined the fund after working as the Regional Director of Community Relations for Citibank for Greater Southern California. And prior to her work in the private sector, Susan served as a senior staff member to Willie L. Brown Jr. during his tenure as Speaker at the California Assembly. She is an alumna of the Coro Fellows Program and received a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of California at Berkeley, so go Bears, and a Master's of Public Policy degree from Claremont University. Susan has also offered that she'll take questions during her presentation, but since we have web viewers, I'd request that you wait for me to come with a handheld mic. That way our web viewers can hear your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's nice to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to questions. What I would just ask, if you have clarifying questions as we go through the presentation, please ask. There may be some questions that I think will generate some really good discussion, and so I may ask that we defer those till the end. But feel free, to ask questions as we go along. So, the California Emerging Technology Fund, as you heard, has the mission of closing the digital divide here in California. And we do that or look at that mission in a couple of ways. One is through deployment, the other adoption. And those are two things that I will talk about throughout the presentation. So deployment is the actual infrastructure. Whether it's copper, whether it's fiber that goes in the ground and eventually to connect to businesses and homes. So that's what we mean by deployment. Adoption is when you pay somebody for internet to get it, at home. And it's the at home that is a critical piece for us. So I know probably everyone in the room has a smartphone. And obviously you have internet connections there, but when we look at our mission, we have defined the at-home connection as critical. And I'll talk more about that as we go on. The other thing, just in our mission, we look at it probably in a more integrated fashion than you might expect. And so part of that, and we'll talk about that too, part of that is why this last sentence on here talks about ensuring that we leave California really more competitive than when we started. That it is, that when we started in 2007, we knew that we had to help various institutions as well as communities understand more about why internet was critical. And of course, that's less of a job these days as we talk about Internet of Things. But as you'll see, still a gap in people's knowledge or thoughts about what needs to happen. So just a little reflection, for a little humor for those of us who sort of work at this day to day. We had a board meeting recently where we were asking, sort of looking at where we've been and where we're going. And this reflects some of our work. Okay. So part of what I'll talk about is a little bit about, who we are and what we do. I'll give you more information about why this is a policy priority for us. So not just as a grant-making organization, why policy is important in this effort. I'll talk about some of our major accomplishments, what the past 10 years has looked like, and what the next 5 years will look like. We are a private foundation. So we are a nonprofit private foundation. We were established by the California Public Utilities Commission, as you can see with these mergers. But we are not part of the California Public Utilities Commission. We're not part of the California legislature. But we do meet with them officially annually to report on progress and what we see as priorities. So in California, which is different than we think any other state, there is a law on the books that says when a regulated company merges, so you see this mostly in telecommunications and in healthcare. Has anyone heard of the California Endowment, for example? Okay, a couple folks, great. So the California Endowment, much like us, came into existence with mergers. And as part of that, what's required are public benefits. And the regulating entity is the one that approves the merger and decides if the public benefit threshold is met. So the $60 million that was put into the California Emerging Technology Fund was considered a public benefit. The endowment in their merger had considerably more, and they continue to exist. We will actually go out of business in 5 years, and that is how we plan our activity. So it didn't make sense to try and endow this much money because it's not much money, right, for California. So you and I would probably be overjoyed if somebody gave us $60 million. But for the state of California, and when you talk about the infrastructure needs around deployment, $60 million does not go far. Let's hear. Per 35 or 33 million, right. So, and really the choice of the Public Utilities Commission at the time was, right, do you give everybody back, $1 who has telephone service, or do you aggregate, funds and put it into, something like the California Emerging Technology Fund? They named us. I have nothing to do with the name. And we are really focused solely on internet, or high-speed broadband, okay? I will use those terms interchangeably, but they are not, right, the same, exactly, okay? And I'm assuming everybody really gets that, but if you don't, we can talk about it. So what we did, initially is set up a strategic action plan based on some interviews, based on research, understanding where the state of the field was when we started, which was 2007. Even though it all happened in 2005, we were officially stood up in 2007. So we set goals, you can see, and with the seed capital, fourfold impact, meaning that we needed to really have $240 million to do what we thought needed to be done. And so we made a decision about the fourfold impact, but that is a combination of raising funds and matching funds. And you'll see more about that as I go through. We decided, our focus, and so we looked at rural deployment, again, infrastructure deployment, the actual copper, fiber, urban disadvantage, which largely means poor, and people with disabilities as our priorities. And you'll see why as I go through the numbers in a minute. We also knew, because we had a specific time in which we are focusing, that we needed to have the stakeholders for this issue really develop relationships and communication and work together, because the issue was not going to be done just because we had spent all the money. We also set goals for what we would reach in terms of closing the digital divide, and I'll come to that in just a second. But some just general values and sort of guiding principles for how we wanted to operate, that, you know, our focus was not about bridging, it was not about, you know, sort of getting sort of there, it was about closing the digital divide. That we would focus on outcomes and return on. We looked at it as an investment, not just a gift of a grant, that we needed to be accountable for it and transparent about it and report on it regularly. We needed to use best practices, you know, that were established and that could be documented and, if you will, audited to guide our work and how we invested the money. And then, of course, as I mentioned, transparent and very disciplined about our evaluation and how we are accountable both to the public and the partners that we engage. So here are our goals. These were set in terms of achieving them by June 2017, so 6 more months. So for access, which again is deployment, and you can see from here, if you're looking at it in terms of supply and demand, right? Deployment is the supply side, and we looked at getting to 98% by 2017. Okay, and these are households within California that have no physical infrastructure to access the internet, even if they wanted to. The California Telehealth Network is a network that we provided matching funds for creating in 2008. The primary money came as a pilot from the FCC, and the idea is that it serves the rural and poorer areas of California where there's not equitable access to health care. There are many parts of California where you cannot find a doctor who understands how to diagnose and treat juvenile diabetes or AIDS, for example, where doctors and nurses have to take off multiple days to go do continuing education, where there are no therapists available if you need one. And so the idea was to put in a network, you know, where it could happen at a high speed, and at this point, and where we work with UC Davis quite a bit, as well as the other 25 teaching hospitals, so we've connected just under 1,000 of the community clinics around California to that network. And then tribal lands, as you might imagine, also there are tribal lands that just last year got electricity and plumbing. So internet is also a big issue. Adoption is, as I mentioned, the subscription, actually having broadband at home. Our goal for June 2017 is 80%, but with our priority groups that I was just covering, at no less than 10%. Okay, and then to increase the accessibility and the universal design as it relates to implementation of devices and services on the network for people with disabilities. And then when we look at how we position California more as a global leader, you know, it's about speed, it's about the economic development opportunities and the green benefits from having the network. Just in case, how many are from California that I can see at least? Okay, it looks like half. So one of the things that we learned going back to Washington, where we needed to lobby on policy and for some funding, like for the California Telehealth Network, is a lot of people in Washington didn't really get the scope of California because they spent their time on the East Coast. And the East Coast geographically looks very different than the West Coast. All right. So in 2007, when we started, as an example, the number of people who were not connected with broadband at home was the equivalent of the population of Illinois. All right. The amount of square miles, okay, so not all square miles in California need to be connected, right? National parks, so forth, the mountain ranges, but there were 44,000 square miles of land that, has people on it that needs to be connected that was not wired at all. There were almost 2 million people with disabilities, which is equivalent to the population of New Mexico, right, who did not have it. So we use this just to give people a sense of the scope. Now, the other thing that's important to understand about California is that our geography, our physical landscape, includes everything that exists in the rest of California. And one of the reasons we have so many households that aren't connected to the internet with infrastructure is because of terrain and geography. Okay. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So I'm not literally going to go through all of these. You can glance. I'm going to highlight a couple of them just for this discussion. Again, this is just a sort of 10-year look at what we've been able to do. So you can see we're almost at our deployment goal, which is a big accomplishment, and you'll get a sense of it as we go on. And we are almost at, well, this number, 84%, shows us, surpassing the adoption goal. 14% of that number is smartphone only. Okay, so we still have some work to do there. One of the ways we hold ourselves accountable and help transparency is we do an annual survey on the adoption levels in California every year. And if you want to see all of them, they are on our website, but I'll have some charts in a moment. You can see what we've been doing. In rural areas and some urban areas as well, we worked with the stakeholders to get them in a consortium, essentially. And these are anchor institutions, schools, libraries, local government, hospitals, major companies for that area, big users for the area of broadband services, to help them learn how to aggregate demand so that they can decide how to make their area more attractive to business. Because typically a telecom provider, broadband provider will come in, pick off a couple of big users and then go away for the rural areas. And so they would serve a few of the institutions and businesses, but not necessarily everybody. So the idea is that you want to have the folks who are using a lot of it and then band together to be able to present their market opportunity. So it's not just one business or one local government. And then you're able to get more companies interested. The more companies that are interested, the better price you're going to get. Go ahead. That's right. Oh, sorry. I can't put this down.
And the question is, could you describe a regional consortia that's working in this area?
Sure. So there are 15 of them in the state of California. There is one in the San Joaquin Valley. And so the San Joaquin Valley is Kern, Tulare, Fresno, Stanislaus, Merced, and I'm missing one county there, but you have the idea. So the southern half of the Central Valley. And they were able to, in one of the areas, get together. The northern part of the county had broadband, but the southern part didn't. And the public hospital was in the southern part. And so by getting together and looking at it more holistically, and in this case, they didn't do it for that entire consortia area. They did it for really just that county. They were able to get broadband, into the public hospital and several other small businesses, down several main corridors where they hadn't been able to get the telecom companies to come talk to them before. So that would be one example. Thank you for the question. Okay, I'm going to come back to this. Digital literacy is a big issue, just like literacy, and digital literacy is not separate from literacy, it is just another part of literacy, but becomes critical in today's world. So we have been working with workforce and institutions to try and make sure every workforce grant that somebody is doing, right, that they're also making sure there's a certain level of digital literacy, that they have an email to communicate with people. I mean, really basic things, because it is astounding how many people really don't have the basics, and that has been quite an interesting process, but nonetheless is moving forward. So as we understood some of the challenges around digital literacy, we realized we needed to work in education as well. But again, we have limited funds. So we worked with a number of folks through research and talking with schools and educators about what was needed, and developed essentially a beta program that we hope gets to the point where it becomes strong enough and known enough that people begin to model it. It's not that people have to sort of name it what we've named it, or we're not trying to sort of replicate it to the point where it's just quote unquote our program. It's more an example that can be researched and demonstrated and other people can use. And so briefly, it's called School to Home. We're currently in 12 districts and 30 schools. We target the worst performing schools throughout California. And essentially, it is training teachers with a significant amount of professional development, and then it's training parents. And this is the piece that most schools miss, on using the technology, how to manage it with their kids, having the parents understand how to communicate with the teachers, and the schools understand how to translate, because you probably realize we speak lots of languages in California. And really transferring the power back to the parent. In households where English is the second language, it's often the kids translating for the parents. And so the parents don't hear things they need to hear. And so by helping them understand they can use the internet to translate and communicate with the teachers, there's a lot more real communication that happens. They understand what's going on with grades, homework, etc. Then after both those are done, the technology goes into the classroom. Some districts are comfortable with it going home. So we're talking about some sort of tablet, laptop. Others aren't. And it's really, we work with the district. Our preference is that it can go home. But you also then have to make sure folks have broadband at home. And this comes down to one of the critical reasons why we think broadband at home, not just your cell phone, is critical. And that's because students can't do homework on their cell phones, and they do now. We have talked to students who literally write out an email to do a paper, send it to themselves, over the course of several days, then go to the library for their 45 minutes and try and put it together. It's crazy stories. We have pictures, of parents sitting out in front of libraries and schools to use the Wi-Fi after hours, because they can't afford $60+ a month, to use, to have it at home. And it's the same thing with workforce training or adults who are trying to better their skills to move forward in their lives. A cell phone isn't good enough for that. You can do lots of things on it, but it is difficult to do those kinds of things. We've also learned that people will do more research and inquiry about their health and what they can do to improve their health status if they're using a device larger than a cell phone. So those are some of the key reasons why when we say closing the digital divide, it means having broadband at home. Okay, so we knew to reach a low-income population that it made sense to start to also look at smart housing through affordable housing. So there are policies and programs that we have developed that provide the ability for the developers of affordable housing to wire them to bring internet into those units, as well as ones that are existing. This is the California Advanced Services Fund, CASF, And that is a state policy that through the California legislature and the California Public Utilities Commission that supports deployment into rural areas where it costs more to deploy. So that those funds are available to providers who want to deploy in those areas to help defray costs. Okay, I'm gonna go on. Okay. So this shows you what we've done with the 60 million and how we've leveraged it into additional funds. Okay, so you see the bottom boxes are a part of our original seed capital, in which we have provided, grants from the ARA. Some of you may recall 2008, 2009, there were federal stimulus funds. Part of it was directed at broadband adoption. We were able to secure, 18 million of those dollars and fund a lot of nonprofits throughout California. The 42 million is the matching funds from the federal government to build out the California telehealth network. The 52 million are matching funds from the grants that we provided. We were responsible for getting the California Advanced Services Fund in place, so we counted that as part of how we leveraged the original seed capital. And then this value, which is 800 million. It is what we call public benefits from corporate consolidations. So in the last 2 years, Frontier bought Verizon landline services, and Charter bought Time Warner cable services. And so as part of what they were seeking was approval from the California Public Utilities Commission, we negotiated with them that said, essentially, if you are going to come into California and you want us to support this, we need commitments from you that you are going to wire households that do not have infrastructure now. And so between those two mergers, there are over 200,000 households that will get wired. And so that is the cost of that, plus several Wi-Fi sites that they are going to put in place. It's 75 for one and 50 for, so 125 Wi-Fi sites, throughout California. So that's the cost that we estimate it will cost the companies to do the work that they committed to. And so you see how we were able to leverage the 60 million well past the 240. Okay. No. Okay. One of the things that we've learned through all of this is, there's no one strategy that is going to take care of everything. You have to work in many different, work on many different fronts, involve many different stakeholders, and share in the work and share in the glory of being able to accomplish these things. So these were the 5 major strategies that we have been using and will continue to use for the remaining 5 years. We are not sure if we're going to make the 98% by June 2017, but certainly over the next 5 years, we intend to do that. We do need the California Advanced Services Fund. That money is spent, and we do need it reauthorized. So we are starting, the next session of the legislature starts next week. We have a bill that's called Internet for All Now Act that we will be promoting to get the rest of that done. We look at our grant making from what we call a venture philanthropy standpoint, which means that we work very closely with our grantees. We don't just give them the money and say, okay, talk to us in, a year or two. And they're paid, the grant is paid out quarterly based on performance outcomes that they need to achieve. And then we bring in people if they're running into obstacles. If we can't help clear the way, we bring in other folks who can help, work through whatever challenges they're facing. Okay. So this is, breaks out our target populations and breaks out the, can't walk too far, breaks out how we've been doing with adoption here in California. What we have set, this goal of 80% was for, as I mentioned, June 2017. We've now set the goal for 2020 to get to 90%. Okay. And so the dotted line represents the 70% for our priority communities, and we of course want to bring them up, get them up to 80% by then. So this just gives you a picture over time. And I'm gonna, okay, of where they are. The hashtag marks or hash marks are the percent of cell phone only within the 74% for low-income households, the 80% for Latino households. And you can see the tremendous growth in these populations over time. Now, one of the things I will tell you that may not be, and this is by region, may not be completely clear. So of the 84%, the population that's left that is not connected, or what we say underconnected, so they have a smartphone, so we call them underconnected. Unconnected is no connectivity. It is 9 million people. Okay, there are 39 states in the United States of America with populations less than that. It's a lot of people. Okay. This is just a general category of how we spent our grants. So 92% are on program. The support is 7.5. Generally, that's very low for a nonprofit in terms of operating costs. These are major categories. I want to make sure I leave time, so I'm not going to spend, detailed time, but it's there if you want to talk about any of it, and it's just a prettier representation of the same chart. But some just highlight numbers. We have been able to date to train really over 800,000 people. And I say we, these are the grantees, right? These are people we're funding and investing in, all right? And how many low-income households we've been able to actually get to subscribe online. So they're paying something. One of our policy initiatives was really advocating for an affordable rate that's about $10 a month. That didn't really come into effect until the spring of this year, but we have been working at this, so even on higher priced programs, we were able to get, and this is households, 262,000 households connected. And this breaks it down in a little more detail in terms of the type of training and who was trained. So, and you can see at some point we even worked with small businesses. But I'm just going to move through this. Just to give you a sense, and this is a very busy chart, but of California versus the US, and the difference between the dots and the stars here, or the stars are without smartphones, the dot lines with the dots include smartphones. So California at the moment is just above the nation, but very close. And so you can see when we started in 2008, we were exactly the same as the nation. Now we're about 4 points ahead. In terms of households, that percentage, just so you understand, how many generally it represents. So that 4% is 500,000 households, right? And it averaged 4 people per household, right? Okay. All right. So what's left? So this is really our focus for the next 5 years is, how do we get federal policy so there are funds available to continue. A lot of the established carriers have said, we don't think there should be any more funds available to subsidize the deployment of broadband. And many of them are trying to get out of the fixed line business. So they're trying to make sure the bridges behind them are not there. That's my opinion, but and so we support those subsidies, to remain in place to help deployment across the country. And then making sure if companies are merging, that we're really requesting public benefits that are real, intangible, that can be measured, that can be audited. And then this is the IFAN Act. This is the state legislation that we're going to be seeking support for in this next legislative session that gets the California fund in place at the Public Utilities Commission to support high-cost deployment. And it says, 2, because this is the second version of it. The last time we took the legislation through in 2009, it was supported with bipartisan support. It actually had unanimous support out of both houses, which was kind of a miracle, frankly. So I don't know. I mean, hopefully it goes well this time. And then the adoption, this is, where we are today, but we're trying to get to 2020, we're trying to get to 90%. And as with most numbers, that last bit takes more resources, more focus, more effort, because they have more obstacles, basically. When it comes to adopting, it's about helping people understand cost, relevancy, and the need for digital literacy. Okay. There is now a broadband lifeline. This is one of the policy initiatives we worked on nationally, where you may have heard of Lifeline telephone service. Broadband is now included in that. The problem is the only way the FCC was able to get it passed was to say you could only have one Lifeline subsidy per household, right? How many of you are in households with more than just yourself, only have one cell phone in your house, right? And no broadband at home? I mean, that's the choice, So if you've already got a Lifeline subsidy for your smartphone, you're not really going to give it up to get broadband at home. So we think this is a continued challenge in terms of how that policy is set. We also, on the energy utility strategy, what that refers to as we think about going out of business and how the work continues where it needs to be. Energy companies have programs for low-income households, right, to help support energy bills and weatherization projects. So they know who the low-income customers and households are. So we're in dialogue with them to help convince them that they could add to their outreach program, helping people understand how to get affordable devices and how to get affordable broadband. Because we need, and that helps the energy utilities as well, because your management of energy is all really online, right? You look on there, whether it's a day, a month, or a week, to understand how you're using it, to be able to change your usage and learn different things, whether you're using, a Nest or other devices that help manage your energy, they require broadband. It's sort of to the Internet of Things. And so we think the energy companies have a stake in low-income households being connected to broadband and want them to help work in this effort as time goes on. So, and the IFAN Act is mentioned again because it would provide some funding for nonprofits to continue doing this work for a few years. All right. And I think I'm going to really just end it here. The rest of our work on this next 5 years is focused on helping institutions that serve low-income communities understand why it's important to them to have people connected and how they can, what we call, integrate their services to be more efficient in reaching people, using the internet and, if you will, looking at neighborhoods from the standpoint of, so if I'm a single mom and I have kids in school, right, and I'm on different social service programs, maybe have somebody from housing, maybe have somebody from the school, maybe have somebody from social services that I interact with, and probably a couple other people. And so our thinking is that with the programs, the county, city, and school programs that support low-income communities, that there is really a data integration that can happen where people understand better where they can intervene and direct resources to help prevent folks from moving into crisis. And it's kind of an 80-20 split on that. And so an example, in Antioch, the police department, the school district, and the city have begun this process. And so there was a young woman who had not had a pattern of acting up in school. And one day, not only was she acting out in the classroom, she was sent to the principal's office, and she hit the principal, at ninth grader. And the police were called. The policemen had a choice at that point to call in for sort of an emergency intervention or to go ahead and process her through the juvenile system. Instead, he called for an intervention. They're called a navigator, and that person was able to, sort of go home with her, figure out more what was going on in this family, an immigrant family where the kids, were the ones who spoke English and the parents didn't. And it turned out both her parents had been laid off. She had allergies, and she was developing asthma. They didn't know, and the parents had said, we can't go to doctors. And so she wasn't telling anybody, but she was having trouble breathing, and she was confused, and this is why she was lashing out. And so the navigator was able basically to take her through and her family through the system and help them figure out how to adjust. And so it's a more integrated approach in terms of understanding the system and having people get access versus somebody who shows up once a month or once a quarter and does a checklist of, are you doing the right things, or that sort of stuff, which is really how it happens now. And so that's where our focus is in the next 5 years. But there's a really important connection in terms of why people need to be on broadband. So let me just conclude there and say thank you and take questions.
So I'll ask the first question. So with the Trump administration, what do you think will be the effects of a Trump administration on your work here in California and also nationally, initiatives to close the digital divide?
Yeah. We're wondering obviously the same thing. We don't expect there to be a lot of willingness to look at the digital divide in terms of specific programs, but Trump has talked about the need for infrastructure. He's mentioned really roads and highways and sort of water systems, but clearly these days copper and fiber are a critical piece of infrastructure, and so it's our hope that that's in his mind, and there will be, so that California, the CETF, the Connect America Fund on the federal level, we're hoping that that is something that he will support, but we don't know. We have no idea. In California, this is why one of the reasons we are going to be really pushing the IFAN Act, because it does establish a California version of that program, and we don't want to see slippage in California. We have a lot of understanding in policymakers. We have some momentum at the county and city levels. We spend a lot of time training new elected officials on this, because it really is about how you develop your knowledge and leverage to negotiate with these companies. And so we're hoping in California we can continue to move forward.
Hi. Are there any efforts to increase access for incarcerated or released individuals?
Incarcerated are not allowed to have phones. We know they do, other than anyway. So that is not, and and that is not an area that we have worked in. Now, once folks come out, we have worked with a lot of workforce programs to take folks and help train them in ICT skills, because that's an area where people can move through upward to better jobs, and jobs that are everywhere. So that's the area that we've worked with formerly incarcerated.
Any additional questions?
Could you comment on the link between your strategy and economic empowerment and how you see the two connected?
Sure. So, today, if you are not online, there's a lot of economic opportunities that go by you, not to mention just applying for a job as the basic one. As of 4 years ago, you could not even pick up an unemployment check at an employment development office. There was those offices went away. You have to do these things online now. And so there are the basics at that level. There are the opportunities for continuing education or education at all that are online. A lot of jobs, as you probably know, are moving more towards certifications at an entry-level job. And so there are a lot of opportunities if you have some basic ICT skills and know then how to get more that come as an individual. There are also the economic development opportunities to communities. It's much like the trains were when the trains were built, the railways were built. If the train bypassed your town, it had a hard time surviving, right? If your town does not have a broadband infrastructure in it that's robust, meaning you have speed, you have, everybody has access to it, your town is going to have a harder time surviving unless it's really, I'm sure there will be towns that will be like, come here, get away from it all. you can really, tune out for a while here. But in terms of most towns, right, if you don't have a broadband infrastructure, it's hard to do any kind of business. Properties sell for less, right? Or properties don't sell these days because they don't have broadband, just in terms of residential, but you think about your businesses. There is one of the issues that comes up for businesses now is redundancy. We used to have a network that had a lot of redundancy built into it. There was a fiber cut in Humboldt last year in February, and it was a major, cut. And so you couldn't pump gas, you couldn't order flowers. One of the largest florist that grows, not florist, the greenhouse that does the lilies that smell, can't remember their name, Star lilies, is in Humboldt. And they were beginning to take their orders right for Mother's Day, believe it or not, in February. But they lost a tremendous amount of business. I mean, the grocery stores you couldn't go to, you couldn't pump gas. I mean, there's so many things connected to the economics of, having a good internet connection. And if you're in the position where you're looking at what's the opportunity, for your city, your state, your region, you really want, one of the things you have to understand, right, is roads, but it's also broadband.
Let's thank Susan for her presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you.